Ezra Vance stood at the wooden fence of the auction yard, clutching a small bag of money. The thin fabric of the bag trembled slightly from his tense fingers. The air was thick with the sharp smell of dust, mixed with the sweat of animals and people. The noise of farmers' voices and the gavel of the auctioneer blended into a chaotic symphony that seemed endless. But for Ezra, all this became background noise when his gaze met the eyes of a horse in the far corner. It was a frail, emaciated horse covered in dust and wounds. Its ribs stood out under thin skin like the keys of an old out-of-tune piano. The animal's eyes, circled with dark rings, were empty and sad. It stood in the corner of the pen, not lifting its head as if ready to disappear. But when Ezra looked at it, he thought he saw a spark of life in those eyes for a moment. "Who would want such a wreck?" one of the farmers standing nearby threw out, his voice oozing with contempt. Ezra let the words pass. To him, this stallion was more than just a useless horse. It was a chance to prove that no one is hopeless. For the first time in his life, he felt he had to do something important, even if it looked silly. "Next lot," the auctioneer's voice rang out, drawing the crowd's attention. The man in the worn vest raised the gavel, pointing to the frail stallion. "Boys and girls, we have a little challenge here. Anyone want to take on this wonder?" The crowd laughed. One of the spectators shouted, "It would be easier to send him to the slaughterhouse than to a farm." Ezra clenched his fist but remained in place. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the trembling in his chest. His gaze met the horse's eyes again. They were calm, but there was something in their depths that wouldn't let the boy look away. $5. Anyone, anyone, the auctioneer continued, his voice losing interest, as if he didn't expect a sale. "All right, let's start at 2. Ezra raised his hand. Suddenly the crowd fell silent. For a few moments it seemed as if even the wind had stopped. Then there was a burst of whispers and muffled laughter. "What's this? A kid wants to be a farmer?" Someone sneered. "Boy, you won't even make enough money for a saddle." $2 from the boy, the auctioneer announced loudly, as if he himself found the situation amusing. "Anyone higher?" Silence. No one responded. The crowd watched with curiosity, as if it were some kind of spectacle. The gavel slammed down with a crash. "Sold!" to the boy in the cap. The crowd parted as Ezra approached the pen to claim his purchase. His heart was pounding so loudly that he barely heard the mockery around him. The horse stood still, as motionless as a statue. "Well, boy, good luck with this poor thing, yours," the farmer said, helping to open the gate. "His name is Alric, but I doubt he'll live much longer." Ezra ignored the farmer and slowly reached out to the horse. The stallion flinched but did not retreat. Their fingers and muzzle met in a light but tangible touch. It was like a silent agreement, a pact of trust that they both made without words. "I'll take care of you," Ezra whispered, his voice barely audible. As he led Alric home, the mockery behind him grew fainter. But in the boy's chest, something new was growing, a firm sense of confidence that he had never felt before. He knew that difficulties lay ahead. He knew he would face doubts and disdain. But he also knew that Alric was more than just a broken horse. This was a chance to change something not only in this animal's life, but also in his own. The evening sun slowly sank below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Ezra struggled to lead Alric to the pen behind the family barn. The horse walked with an uneven, uncertain gait, stumbling at every step. By the time they arrived, the boy was already breathing heavily from the effort, and Alric looked like he was about to collapse. The pen was simple, a wooden fence with peeling paint in places, and an old canopy that served more as decoration than protection. The Vance family couldn't afford luxuries, but Ezra knew this was better than nothing. He helped Alric inside and carefully closed the gate behind him. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, watching the horse slowly lower itself onto the straw bedding. "You're home." Alric did not respond. He just sighed heavily, laying his head on his front legs and closed his eyes. Ezra stood there for a few more minutes, hoping the horse would show some sign of gratitude or interest, but nothing happened. The boy sighed and headed towards the house. Later that night, Ezra sat at the kitchen table. His mother, Cassandra Vance, tiredly prepared dinner. Shadows from the lamp danced on her face, highlighting the wrinkles that had appeared from years of working on the ranch. You do realize that this horse is a big responsibility, right? She began, not turning around. Her voice was stern but not without softness. This is not a toy, Ezra. I know, Mom, the boy replied, clutching a cup of water in his hands. But I think he deserves a chance. Cassandra turned to him, holding a towel in her hands. Her eyes looked at him intently as if trying to read his thoughts. I saw the way you looked at him, she said, softening. Like he was more than just a horse. But you know what? This won't be easy. Are you ready for this? Ezra nodded. Yes, I'm ready. I'll learn. A faint smile lit up her face. Good. But you must remember, this is not just about you. It's about him, too. You need to understand what he fears, what hurts him, and only then can you move forward. The next day, Ezra woke up before dawn. He quickly dressed, grabbed a basket with leftover carrots and pieces of old bread, and headed to the pen. The morning air was fresh, and the grass was damp with dew. When he approached, Alric was still lying in the same position he had left him the night before. Good morning, boy, Ezra said softly, opening the gate. The horse raised his head and looked at him with tired eyes. I brought you something tasty. Ezra crouched down and offered a piece of carrot. Alric initially pulled his head back, but then his nostrils quivered, catching the scent. He slowly reached forward, cautiously taking the piece of carrot from the boy's hand and beginning to chew. Ezra could barely contain a smile of joy. See, I'm not going to hurt you, he whispered, offering another carrot. This time Alric took it faster. It was a small, almost imperceptible step, but for Ezra, it meant everything. For the first time since their meeting, the horse showed a sign of trust. Later that morning, Lincoln Bray, their neighbor and experienced farmer, approached the pen. He leaned against the wooden fence, watching as Ezra gently brushed Alric's coat with a soft brush. You've got a big project here, boy, Lincoln said, twirling a piece of straw in his hands. This stallion looks like he's seen better days. Ezra looked at his neighbor and nodded. Yes, sir, but I think he'll make it. He's strong. He just needs time. Lincoln smirked, but there was a glint of approval in his eyes. You're right, but to pull a guy like this through, you need more than just time. You need knowledge and patience. Do you have that? Yes, sir, Ezra replied firmly, not taking his eyes off his work. I'm ready to learn. All right, Lincoln said, looking over Alric. Then here's some advice. Start simple. Clean water, soft hay, a bit of oats to get him used to eating. And remember, he needs to understand that he can trust you. Trust is everything. Ezra nodded, committing every word his neighbor said to memory. He understood that a long road lay ahead, but he was ready to walk it. That evening, Ezra sat by the pen again. He wasn't doing anything special, just being near Alric, sitting on the edge of the wooden fence. The horse slowly chewed his hay, occasionally glancing at the boy. You remind me of Dad, Ezra said softly, looking at the starry sky. He never gave up, no matter how bad things got. Alric seemed to be listening. His ears twitched in the direction of the boy's voice. Ezra felt a faint but warm sensation inside. It was another small step. Maybe he wasn't sure what lay ahead, but he knew one thing. They were in this together now. The early morning woke Ezra with the promise of a new day. He opened his eyes and immediately heard the soft clop of hooves in the pen. Alric. The boy jumped out of bed, pulled on his boots and ran to the barn, barely managing to throw on his jacket. Outside it was a cool dawn, and the sky was streaked with pink and gray hues. Ezra felt his heart pounding with excitement. Alric stood by the wooden fence, slightly alert but no longer as tense as in the first days. His coat was still dull, but a soft sheen was beginning to return, as if life was awakening within him. Ezra smiled as he approached. Good morning, boy. How'd you sleep? He asked softly, picking up a bucket of oats. Alric turned his ears towards the boy but did not retreat. It was a good sign. As the horse slowly chewed, Ezra took a brush and began gently brushing his coat in circular motions. He did this every day, and with each passing day, Alric became calmer, allowing the boy to stay longer by his side. But today, something was different. When the brush touched the hind leg, Alric suddenly jerked, his eyes wide, and he reared back, slamming into the wooden fence. Ezra instinctively raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. Easy, easy, boy, he said softly, taking a step back. Alric was trembling like an aspen leaf. His breathing was rapid, his nostrils flaring. Ezra looked at him with worry and sadness, understanding that the reason for this reaction went deeper than simple fear. Later that day, Ezra headed to Lincoln Bray's house. The old man was sitting on the porch, polishing his old leather boots. Seeing the boy, he tipped his hat and smiled. "Something happened, Ezra?" he asked, noticing the troubled look on the boy's face. Ezra sat on the steps, placing his hands on his knees. "It's Alric. He got scared when I touched his hind leg. I didn't do anything wrong, but he reacted like he remembered something terrible." Lincoln slowly nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Horses are strange creatures, boy. They remember pain just like we do, sometimes even deeper. If he's reacting like that, it means something in his past made him afraid. Your job is to show him he's safe." "How?" Ezra asked. "I want him to trust me, but I don't know how to do it." The old man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Time and patience, boy. You need to be there for him, even if he doesn't realize it. He'll understand you're not the enemy if you're persistent, but kind." Ezra returned to the ranch with renewed determination. Over the next few days, he began to work cautiously with Alric, finding ways to earn his trust. He didn't rush and didn't demand too much. Each time he approached the hind leg, he spoke to the horse in a soft, soothing voice. "This doesn't hurt, Alric." "You're okay, boy," he whispered as his hands gently touched the horse. One evening, as the sky turned shades of fiery orange, Ezra decided to try again. He stood in the pen with a bucket of fresh water, watching as Alric slowly approached him. This time, the boy was even more patient. He touched the horse's back, then smoothly lowered his hand down until his fingers brushed the hind leg. Alric tensed but did not jerk away. It was the moment Ezra had been waiting for. He held his breath, stroking the leg with gentle movements. Alric turned his head, looked at the boy, and there was no fear in his eyes. It was progress, slow but significant. However, one evening, when everything seemed to be falling into place, something unexpected happened. Ezra decided to take Alric for a walk outside the pen to give him more space. The horse followed him on a soft lead, occasionally snorting with curiosity. But then, just short of the tree line, Alric suddenly stopped. His ears pricked up, his eyes wide, and his nostrils flared. Ezra stopped, following his gaze, but saw nothing. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly. Suddenly, Alric reared up, tugging on the lead so hard that Ezra nearly fell. The horse began to thrash, as if an invisible threat surrounded him. The boy felt fear grip him, but he wasn't about to give up. "Alric, easy! It's me, it's okay!" he shouted, holding the lead with both hands. Several long minutes passed before Alric finally calmed down. His chest heaved, and his eyes were still wide, but he allowed Ezra to approach. The boy carefully ran his hand over the horse's neck, feeling the muscles tremble. "What happened to you?" he whispered, looking at the horse. He didn't know the answer, but he was certain of one thing. Alric wasn't just afraid. He was fighting something that lived inside him, something that had left deep scars. Ezra spent the evening sitting by the pen, watching Alric. The horse stood calmly, but there was something strange in his gaze, as if he were looking not at the world around him, but within himself. "I don't know what happened to you," Ezra said softly, propping his chin on his hand. "But I promise we'll figure this out together. You'll never be alone again." The sky darkened and the first stars began to shine, illuminating the silhouette of the boy and his horse. Their journey was just beginning, and more challenges lay ahead. But Ezra knew he would be there, no matter what. Alric deserved this, not just as an animal, but as a being that was also trying to find its way to the light. Ezra stood by the pen and looked at Alric, who now looked completely different from that day at the auction. His coat had begun to shine under the sunlight, and the ribs that had once stood out so sharply were now hidden under healthy muscles. The boy proudly watched the horse peacefully grazing. But inside him, a sense of unease still lingered, as if something ominous hung over them. This unease did not disappear, even when he returned home that evening. Outside it was quiet, too quiet, and the night air felt heavy. Cassandra, his mother, noticed it too. She sat at the kitchen table, looking out the window at the darkening sky. "Something's not right," she said, breaking the silence. Ezra looked up from the book he was trying to read. What do you mean? Cassandra shrugged, but her gaze remained tense. Just a feeling. Sometimes nature speaks to us, but we don't always listen. Ezra nodded, but deep down, he thought it was just her fatigue. He tried not to give in to her fears, though they made him think. That night he had trouble falling asleep. His sleep was interrupted by a sharp, panicked neigh. Ezra instantly jumped up, his feet carrying him to the window. Behind the house, towards the pen, tongues of flame licked the sky. Fire! His heart raced as he realized Alric was in the pen. Mom, fire! He shouted, already running out of the house. Cassandra rushed out behind him, grabbing a bucket of water. But Ezra didn't even look at her. His gaze was fixed on the pen. Flames engulfed the wooden posts, and thick smoke filled the air. He could barely make out Alric's silhouette inside, rearing and kicking, trying to escape. Alric! He shouted, rushing forward. Ezra, no! Cassandra screamed, but the boy didn't listen. He grabbed a blanket, dipped it in a barrel of water, and covering his face, rushed towards the pen. The heat was unbearable, but his fear for Alric was stronger. Easy, boy, I'm here! He shouted, making his way through the thick smoke. Alric froze, hearing Ezra's voice. His wild, terrified eyes stopped on the boy, giving Ezra a chance. He threw the wet blanket over Alric's back, and holding the lead, guided him out of the pen. The pen door was jammed from the heat. The boy kicked it, but it didn't budge. Then he grabbed a nearby charred piece of wood and pushed the door with all his might. With a crash, it fell, and fresh air rushed in. Alric lunged forward, escaping the pen with Ezra. They both fell to the grass, coughing and gasping for air. Alric stood nearby, trembling, but alive. Cassandra ran to them, tears streaming down her face. You're crazy, boy, she whispered, hugging her son. But you saved him. In the morning, when the smoke had cleared, Ezra returned to the pen. All that remained were charred ruins. He slowly approached the ashes and saw something shiny among the cinders. Bending down, he picked up a small silver lighter. On its surface was engraved a name, Severus Reynolds. Ezra felt his blood boil. This was no accident. Someone had wanted the pen to burn, and that someone clearly hadn't expected the horse and the boy to survive. Later that day, the sheriff arrived. He was an older man with a tired face but still a firm gaze. Ezra showed him the lighter, explained the situation, but the sheriff only frowned. We don't have enough evidence to accuse anyone, he said, but I advise you to be on your guard. If this was arson, someone might come back. Ezra didn't want to hear those words. He clenched his teeth, gripping the lighter tighter in his hand. I won't let them take Alric, he said firmly, looking the sheriff in the eye. The sheriff nodded. That's right, boy. Take care of him. But be careful. Over the next few weeks, Ezra and Cassandra rebuilt the pen. Instead of wooden posts, they used metal ones, reinforcing them with cement foundations. Lincoln Bray helped install floodlights and motion sensors around the property. Ezra even found an old camera, which he mounted on a tree to monitor the pen at night. Every time he entered the pen, Ezra remembered that fire. He saw how Alric had become even more anxious. Sometimes at night, Alric would jump to his feet, snorting and listening to every sound. Ezra felt his fear because he couldn't shake it off either. But despite this, the bond between them grew stronger. Each day, training with Alric, Ezra saw the horse trust him more and more. He knew there were still many challenges ahead, but he was confident they would make it. Together. Weeks passed after the fire, and life on the ranch began to slowly return to normal. Alric grew stronger with each passing day. Now he wasn't just standing in the pen. His movements had regained confidence, and his gaze, once filled with despair, now shone with new colors. Ezra watched as the horse paced in a circle, practicing the steps he had helped him master. But the sense of threat still hung in the air. One day, after a long morning of work in the pen, Ezra heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. He turned and saw a shiny black truck pulling up to the house. On it was emblazoned an emblem of a horseshoe and the letters HR. A man in a dark hat emerged from the car, accompanied by two others dressed similarly. The man adjusted his jacket, scanning the property, and walked straight towards Ezra. Good day, young man, he said with a wide but cold smile. My name is Severus Reynolds. I represent the regional horse competition of the county. We've heard about your horse. Ezra felt a tension rise within him. He recognized that name. the same Severus Reynolds whose lighter was found in the ashes of the pen. "How can I help you?" Ezra asked, trying not to show his emotions. Reynolds continued to smile, but there was a firm note in his voice. "We've heard that you've done an incredible job with this stallion. If the rumors are true, your horse is a real wonder. We'd like to offer you the opportunity to show him at the annual county fair." Ezra frowned. He knew about the fair. It was the biggest event in the county where the best horses competed. Winning such an event could bring fame and recognition, but his inner sense told him that Reynolds hadn't just shown up for no reason. Before he could respond, his mother, Cassandra, stepped out of the house. Her face expressed clear distrust. "What's going on here?" she asked, casting a sharp glance at the strangers. Reynolds removed his hat and gave a slight bow, as if his manners could hide the underlying threat. "Mrs. Vance, we simply want to give your son an opportunity. Your stallion could be a star. This is a chance for your ranch, for your family." Cassandra stood in front of Ezra, her voice firm. "We appreciate your offer, Mr. Reynolds, but Alric is not a show horse. He's part of our family now, and we're not going to use him for your shows." Reynolds continued to smile, but his eyes grew cold. "That's a shame. A horse with such potential deserves to be on stage, not hidden away on a rundown ranch." With that, he turned and headed back to his car. However, before getting in, he threw over his shoulder, "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." Ezra watched the departing truck for a long time. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this offer than met the eye. Later that day, when he told Lincoln Bray everything, the old man thoughtfully shook his head. "This Reynolds is a slippery character," he said, sitting on his porch. "But you know what, boy? Sometimes to prove something, you have to step onto the stage, even if you don't want to." Ezra pondered the neighbor's words. His desire to protect Alric clashed with an inner fire, the desire to show everyone what they were capable of. In the end, they had both come a long way to be here. That evening, Ezra went out to the pen, where Alric stood gazing at the distant stars. The boy approached him, stroked his neck, and whispered, "What do you think, boy? Can we do this? Can we show them that you're not just a horse, that you're a real fighter?" Alric slowly turned his head towards him, as if understanding what he was saying. Ezra took this as a sign. The next morning, to Cassandra's surprise, Ezra announced, "I want to give it a try. We'll participate in the fair." Her eyes widened. "Ezra, are you sure? This will be tough, and I don't trust this Reynolds." "I'm sure," the boy replied firmly. "This isn't for them, it's for us. We'll prove that Alric is more than they think." Her face softened, and she nodded. "All right, but know this. We'll support you no matter what happens." The next 2 weeks were the toughest in Ezra's life. He and Alric trained from dawn till dusk. Lincoln helped them prepare the horse for the competition, teaching complex maneuvers and jumps. Each day was filled with sweat, dirt, and a stubborn determination to overcome their limits. Ezra felt their bond with Alric growing even stronger. They worked as one, understanding each other without words. Each evening, exhausted but content, he would sit by the pen and whisper, "We'll make it. I believe in you." Finally, the day of the fair arrived. Ezra looked at Alric, who stood proudly, as if he knew this moment was their chance to show the world their strength. The boy took a deep breath, adjusted the reins, and said, "All right, boy, let's show them who we are." Alric neighed in response, ready for the challenge ahead. The day of the fair dawned with a clear, cloudless sky. Ezra had never seen so many people in one place. The vast field surrounded by stands buzzed with the hum of the crowd. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the aroma of fried food and dust. The boy led Alric down the path, trying to ignore the glances that were occasionally cast their way. Alric looked magnificent. His coat shone, his mane was neatly combed, and the muscles under his skin rippled with every step. He walked confidently, but his ears occasionally twitched, picking up the noise of the crowd. Ezra felt the tension in the air growing. "Look, it's that boy with his rescued horse," he heard someone whisper behind him. "I wonder how long they'll last." Ezra gritted his teeth but didn't look back. Those words only fueled his determination. When their turn came, the announcer declared, "And now, On the field, young participant Ezra Vance and his horse Alric. The story of this pair has touched many. A wounded, forgotten stallion, saved from death. Let's see what they are capable of. The crowd fell silent as Ezra led Alric onto the field. At that moment, the world seemed to slow down. The boy's heart pounded so loudly that he could barely hear the noise around him. He looked at Alric, who raised his head and took a deep breath. The boy leaned in and whispered softly, "This is our moment, boy. Just follow me." The competition began with simple tasks. Alric easily completed the first series of obstacles, smoothly jumping over the barriers. The crowd began to whisper, and then the first applause broke out. The boy felt a surge of confidence filling him. They moved as one. Each gesture, each step of the horse was precise and harmonious. But then came the difficult part, the high barrier that required perfect synchronization. This was the moment that would decide everything. Ezra guided Alric toward the barrier, feeling the tension through the reins. The horse hesitated for a moment, but the boy gently pulled him forward. "You can do it, Alric." "We can do it," he whispered, as if it were a password that only they understood. Alric took off, his powerful legs striking the ground. They approached the barrier, and at the last moment, the horse pushed off, soaring into the air. The crowd held its breath. Ezra felt the world freeze around them. When they landed, the field erupted in applause. Alric stood proudly, as if he knew he had just proven to the world that he was capable of anything. After the final performance, when all the participants gathered on the field, the announcer declared the results. Ezra stood next to Alric, holding his lead. He didn't hope for victory. That would be a bonus. The main thing was that he and his horse had done it. And the winner in the category, Best Horse and Rider Duo, Ezra Vance and Alric. The crowd burst into cheers and applause. Ezra felt his face flush with heat. He looked at Alric, who looked ahead with calm composure. This was their victory. Later, when the crowd dispersed, Severus Reynolds approached them. His face no longer held the self-assurance, rather a mix of humility and displeasure. "You proved me wrong," he admitted, removing his hat. "This horse is truly unique. But know this, boy, your journey is just beginning. The world can be cruel to those like you. Take care of him." Ezra looked at Reynolds with a firmness the man clearly hadn't expected to see. "I'm not afraid. Alric and I will face whatever comes our way." At sunset, Ezra sat by the pen, holding the trophy in his hands. Alric stood nearby, slowly chewing his hay. The boy stroked his neck and smiled. "We did it, boy," he said, "and this is just the beginning." The stars began to shine in the sky, illuminating their quiet corner of the world. At that moment, Ezra felt that they both had found their place, not just as a boy and his horse, but as two beings who had believed in each other and proven that together they could achieve anything.